Before I get started, I want to give a shout out to all the contributors of my Patreon channel. Your support is necessary, and without you, none of this is possible. And if you'd also like to support the channel directly, Cash App and PayPal are available. Just be sure to let me know in the For section if it's okay for me to thank you publicly, or else I'll assume you'll want to remain anonymous.
And here we go.
Layman's Journal, Chapter 255. The rise of Kevin Samuels in 2021 marked what many believe to be the apex of the male advocacy movement. But in 2022, when Mr. Samuels met his demise and no one seemingly took his place, people thought it was all over. Feminists and misandrists alike were celebrating what they thought was the end of male advocacy online. They thought that we, men, were just going to shut up and go away, and that things would go back to the status quo because our, quote, Messiah had died. But unless a grain of wheat falls into the earth and dies, it remains alone. But if it dies, it bears much fruit. And by the end of 2024, Donald Trump was reelected for a second time, defeating their efforts to elect a woman president. Shortly after that, we saw the death of the DEI movement, not only in government, but in the private sector, as major corporations everywhere announced they were no longer backing diversity, equity, and inclusion programs, that white women, who are by far the greatest benefactors of DEI, would no longer hold a competitive advantage over men in their organizations. And all of that happened because of young men. Trump progressively courted the young male vote by doing interviews with popular YouTubers with large male audiences, which is why he won first-time voters and came within a margin of error with voters under age 30. And that's when the media realized male advocacy wasn't dead, in spite of what the feminists and misandrists were saying, that Mr. Samuels was that grain of wheat that fell into the earth, died, and multiplied, that he was just the beginning of this, that male advocacy was stronger than ever, so strong in fact it could swing an election. And so now the media is asking questions. They want to know how this male advocacy movement started and why so many young men are drawn to it. And there's one gentleman in particular who I think has the perfect answer for that question. It's Dr. Orion Terabon. He has a YouTube channel called Psych Hacks, and if you haven't already, please subscribe to his channel. But Dr. Terabon does an excellent job, in my opinion, of explaining why male advocacy exists and how he believes the answer can be found in the disappearance of male spaces. And we're going to talk about it. So, let's get it. So Dr. Terabon begins his lecture on the absence of male role models.
Basically, I've been asked on a few occasions to explain the cultural phenomenon of the male ideologue. Like, how have certain charismatic or forceful personalities managed, for lack of a better word, to seduce the hearts and minds of so many young men? What might be the psychological explanation for this happening? Now, the best answer I've heard to these questions, which is not a bad answer, is that this springs from an absence of real male role models. We're currently passing through a crisis of masculinity in which traditional templates of maleness have been systematically dismantled, and nature abhors a vacuum.
And right off the bat, I think he's spot on, because this is something that is often said in regards to the Black community, where out-of-wedlock births and single mother-led homes are higher than the national average. And because young men and boys naturally look for male archetypes that exude strength and masculinity, boys born in that environment tend to use the men they see as templates of what it means to be a man. In other words, they look for male role models, be it in media or men within the community. Now, this can be a good or bad thing depending on what they choose to fixate on. Sometimes it's an athlete, a coach, an uncle, a big cousin or pastor, even a TV dad. But other times it can be a local gang leader or a rapper that engages in degenerate behavior. Again, it all depends on what he's exposed to. My point is, young men and boys need role models. They need men who have been there, done that, to show them what it means to be a man. And it's only a man who can teach them.
However, there's something else that I'd like to talk about with respect to this phenomenon that I don't think has received adequate attention and consideration. After all, these ideologues are not just strong personalities, they give rise to ad hoc societies around them. It's not like millions of young men are just like individually locked into a single internet personality. They're also interacting with each other. And this is just as, if not more, important than the personality around whom that society forms.
So what Dr. Terabon is saying right here is, young men and boys aren't just caught up in a cult of personality. This is a culture of men, a community of men talking to one another, and they're comparing notes and learning. So it's not a congregation or fan base. It's a space, a place where men feel safe to express themselves. And it's largely due to the fact that they have no other place to vent.
It's extremely difficult, if not impossible, to find any spaces in the West that are just for men. Like, it very much used to be a man's world. The business world in particular, and work in general, used to be a male space. Not anymore. Women are in the workforce, and they're not going anywhere. Then it used to be sports. No. Every broadcast now has female commentators or reporters or announcers. Then it used to be social clubs. No, those were discriminatory and have been legally dismantled. I mean, even the Boy Scouts doesn't exist anymore because I guess it was too traumatic for girls to be excluded from that organization.
Now, this is something I've been saying for a while. Everything that men had for ourselves has been commandeered by women, acclimated and retrofitted for their sensibilities. For example, every time I see a football game, basketball game, I see women working as sideline reporters and panelists, referees, and yes, even as coaches.
Wildcats was a fish-out-of-water comedy about a woman taking over as the head coach of a ragtag high school football team. As one review read, it's about a team nobody wants to coach, stuck with a coach nobody wants to hire. 36 years ago, that was pretty much how female football coaching was viewed. In the years since, we've seen doors open and attitudes change. This NFL season started with an unprecedented 15 female coaches.
ESPN, which was a network created for men by men, is now a female-serving institution, with on-air personalities that routinely lecture men on their privilege and behavior.
Stephen A., with all due respect, this is not about pointing the finger. Stop. We are not here, Stephen A., to further blame women. That is not why we are here.
But it's not just sports. Video games and action movies have been dominated by women. Look no further than what EA and Blizzard have done to distance themselves from their male consumer base.
Here's the ginger. Thank you. So, I'm non-binary.
So ESPN, the NFL, NBA, the MCU, Electronic Arts, and Blizzard, brands that were built on a male fan base, no longer serve their audience. They've opted instead to appease women.
However, this infiltration of unisex spaces has not been bilateral. Women want men to surrender male spaces, but they want to retain their own. The Boy Scouts have been disbanded, but the Girl Scouts are alive and well, and they don't intend to admit boys anytime soon. Indeed, these female spaces are proud, if not a little misguided, about their identities. For instance, there's a blog post on the Girl Scouts website entitled, "In a world of boys' clubs, give her one of her own." Like, I don't know what world the Girl Scouts is looking at, but it's not the world I see. There are no male spaces anymore.
And that's the thing I find most frustrating. The fact that we, as men, can no longer have our stuff. We can no longer have our spaces. While women, on the other hand, they get to keep their stuff. Lifetime, Oxygen, Women's Entertainment, OWN, VH1, Hallmark, Fox Soul. All of these are examples of entertainment spaces created exclusively for women, with no push to retrofit them for a male audience. So we, as men, have always been okay with women having their spaces, but women have never been okay with us having ours. So their stuff is their stuff, and our stuff is also their stuff.
Even the social dialogue has been conquered. Like, good luck trying to address a male problem. Like, take, I don't know. For instance, men are significantly more likely to kill themselves than women are in every society on the planet. In the US, for instance, about 80% of completed are male. However, ideology has advanced so thoroughly into the public discussion that the entire conversation is skewed away from helping those most affected by the problem when those people are men. The question here is not why are millions more men than women themselves, it's why are transgendered folks significantly more likely to attempt suicide than cisgendered people. While this is true, it's also true that the number of completed suicides by males dwarfs the number of completed by all transgendered people, and this is how a problem that disproportionately affects men is co-opted. When men speak to other men about their problems, they're reminded not to forget about women, because they suffer too.
And this is another big one, the prohibition against addressing male issues. And it's just as Dr. Tara Bond said, talk about a problem that men have, and it's, what about women? Don't forget about the women, even when it comes to a scenario as unique as self-deletion, where men lead by a large margin. And it's interesting that he referenced the trans community, because they're a fraction of the population, less than 1% at best, but we're constantly reminded how we as a culture have to affirm their gender choices and adhere to their selected pronouns, because without that affirmation or support, they'll likely delete themselves. Even now, in California, there's a law that says the parent that reaffirms their child's chosen gender in a custodial dispute is the one that will get custody of the child. That's just how deep this thing goes, how concerned the culture is with trans people. And again, that's a fringe group. But when it comes to men, who represent half of the population, and the rate in which we take our lives, there's radio silence. It's only in a general sense that men's issues are discussed, and always with women included in the discussion.
And it's no coincidence that it is within this context of a total abolition of male spaces that certain ideologues have appeared. And what is their fundamental message? I'm for men. I'm a man talking directly to men, and I'm on men's side. I'm going to help men get what they want, and I'm going to address men's problems, and I'm going to put men first. And this probably feels like mainlining heroin to a lot of young men, because this isn't the 19th century. These young men have potentially lived their whole lives in the West without being acknowledged in that way. They haven't yet found a place where being a man isn't just not a negative, but may actually be a positive. And they feel seen and heard for the first time in a message that's exclusively meant for them.
Now this is significant for younger men, because I'm a Zennial. I'm a hybrid of Generations X and the Millennials. So I remember men having their own spaces. I remember the Boy Scouts. I remember when Augusta National Golf Club was for men only, and when video games, action movies, and sports focused on men. But the men and boys of this generation know nothing of that world. All their lives, women have been the only ones with gender-specific spaces. And it's easy to see why charismatic figures like Andrew Tate are so appealing to them. Because if you study Andrew Tate and his communication style, it's similar to that of a WWE personality. Personally, he reminds me of Hulk Hogan, Rowdy Piper, and Ric Flair. And for those who follow the world of sports, he has the confidence and bravado of a Deion Sanders, Michael Irvin, or Muhammad Ali. Now, I grew up on all of these big personalities, so Tate isn't a unique figure to me, but for young men who haven't, he's one of a kind.
And this is the important part. Some of these personalities go too far, and in their advocacy of men, they end up saying, women. Not a good look. But most of them don't. However, even those who don't might as well have. Like, the social inference here is that anyone who must be for men must be against women. And every social advocate for men is a would-be oppressor of women. And that just isn't true. And we certainly don't think it's true when it's the other way around. Like, the thought leaders and organizations that proudly and explicitly advance women's interests aren't primarily considered to be the sworn oppressors or enemies of men. But this incorrect belief creates the problem that we are discussing. Like, if just advocating for men implies that you're against women, then the vast majority of men will be bullied out of the discourse or just think it's not worth it, leaving only the most aggressive or powerful personalities. And if cultural progress is considered to be the infiltration and dismantling of every single male space, then the only ones that will survive will be those that actively defend themselves and fight for their existence.
So, in other words, nature abhors a vacuum. The prohibition of males and their issues has given rise to extremists, men who don't care if they're canceled. And if you want young men and boys to get away from those toxic influences on social media, from the guys who say, "F*** women," you have to invite male voices and male issues back into the mainstream. But most importantly, you have to give us back our spaces. And if that's the solution, if that's what has to occur to get rid of the radicals, that isn't likely to occur, because for that to happen, women are going to have to give up what they've taken. So for example, a woman like Malika Andrews is going to have to vacate her position at ESPN. Kathleen Kennedy would have to relinquish her death hold on Lucasfilms, and that's never going to happen. They'd rather see everything burned to the ground before they give anything back. Look at what's happening at Disney, for example, with their recent Star Wars series, The Acolyte. That was a complete and total disaster. And the star of the series, Amanda Stenberg, instead of taking ownership for her failure, she doubled down on her buffoonery.
For those who aren't aware, there has been a rampage of vitriol that we have faced since the show was even announced, when it was still just a concept and no one had even seen it. And that's when we started experiencing a rampage of, I would say, hyper-conservative bigotry and vitriol, prejudice, hatred, and hateful language towards us.
All right. So women aren't going to give anything up. What they're more likely to do is fight against it. They will do everything they can to keep men and their issues out of the mainstream, as well as the territory they've conquered. And CNN is the perfect example of this. This past weekend, they did an investigative report on the manosphere. But unlike Dr. Taraban, who seeks to explain why it exists and what solutions can be implemented to keep the toxic personalities from growing in influence, they seek to destroy it. And they did this by tying it to white supremacy. And the only quote expert featured in their special report was a woman named Vera Papasova, who spent an entire year dating men who follow the manosphere.
This is Vera Papasova. She spent the last year dating far-right men in New York City for a story for Cosmopolitan magazine.
They're the most insecure men I've ever sat down with. It was really difficult to have some of these dates because they were so insecure, because they don't really know who they are and they don't know how to figure that out.
She said the men she dated got all their news and information from the so-called manosphere.
They did not listen to anything else. They're only listening to independent media, and they're only listening to men talking to men.
The manosphere is made up of macho podcasters and influencers.
There's no such thing as an independent female.
Most women have zero concept of like money.
Females don't have independent thought.
One of these guys brought me to a political meeting.
And did they talk about politics?
Barely. They talked about, it was a bunch of men complaining about girlfriends and wives, regurgitating Andrew Tate type of advice about how to train your girlfriend, how to train your wife to be submissive. And so this group was supposed to be a political group, but they're talking about relationship problems. And the fact that that's what most of the time was spent on, you don't need to be a neo-Nazi. You need therapy.
So this lovely lady, this expert on men, pretended as if she was romantically interested in men for the purpose of pathologizing them, to exploit and deride them. And that's who CNN calls their expert. And she says they need therapy. But I beg to differ. Anyone who would do something as evil as she did is the one who needs therapy. But my point is, CNN and the mainstream press alike aren't trying to help or understand men. They want the silent suffering, isolation, and self-deletion to continue. In other words, they want the status quo. Now, the good news is, women like Miss Vera and networks like CNN are dinosaurs, relics of the past. Social media has overtaken broadcast media, and it now serves as the dominant form of mass communication. And the rhetoric they spew in the mainstream media against men has now fallen on deaf ears. And it's voices like Dr. Taraban that are most prominent. So I'm going to close things right here, but before I go, check out this preview of my layman's breakdown on Patreon. Layman's Journal Chapter 254, 2018 was a really good year for movies. Almost too good. We had films like Black Panther, Avengers: Infinity War, Deadpool 2, and Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. You could argue it was the best year in recent history, but in spite of all the commercial success of those films, there were two movies in particular that I believe were exponentially better than all of them. One was Searching, and the other was Widows. But neither of those films garnered any type of box office success. Both grossed less than $100 million. However, Searching did well for what it was. You see, it was a small budget film. It cost next to nothing to produce. So even though it only made $42 million in the box office, that was a huge profit given what it cost to make. Widows, on the other hand, was a massive commercial failure. It only grossed $72 million of the $105 million needed to break even, meaning the studio took a $33 million loss. And to make matters worse, it had an all-star cast. It featured Viola Davis, Liam Neeson, Elizabeth Debicki, Colin Farrell, Daniel Kaluuya, and Brian Tyree Henry, all of whom did an outstanding job in their roles. But still, they garnered no attention from the Academy. So the film had no commercial or critical success. And I think that's largely due to girl power fatigue. You see, Widows was released at the height of the DEI woke era of Hollywood. It came out at a time when films like the Star Wars sequel trilogies, the Ghostbusters sequels, and that god-awful Ocean's 11 spin-off, Ocean's 8. And all of those films featured strong heroic females and masculine roles that were originally written for men. So when people saw the trailer for Widows, a heist movie featuring an all-female cast with the underlying theme of weregirls fighting mean boys in a male-dominated world, the collective response was,
"Oh shit, here we go again."
Yeah, they wanted no part of it. Everyone was tired of the girl boss flicks. And they were right, to a degree. Widows, like many other films featuring strong female protagonists in this woke era of movie making, is feminist rage porn. It makes masculinity in men the central part of the problem, while simultaneously celebrating it in women. So while Veronica, the film's lead character, is allowed to be a strong, stoic, courageous, and morally incorruptible leader, the men who exude those same characteristics are all evil and in direct confrontation with her. And of the few men who are the good guys, they're either dead or in submission to Veronica, the female protagonist. And if you want to hear more about that theory, please check out my breakdown of Speak No Evil. It's some of my best work. But getting back to the topic at hand, it all fits into the theme of this channel. Entertainment media is more than entertainment, it's propaganda through art. The stories may be fake, but the messages behind the stories are always real. For good or bad, better or worse, the goal is to influence your mind, change your way of thinking to affect culture. And the thing about propaganda in art is that it isn't always evident. It's easy to spot in bad films and TV shows. For example, you can see it a mile away in films like The Woman King and Captain Marvel, or in shows like She-Hulk and Amazon Prime's The Power. However, you don't see it in films that are entertaining. And Widows, in my opinion, is one of those films where the propaganda is not evident, because the messaging was subtle and grounded. And what I mean by that is, there were no she-man moments. There were no female Avengers assembling, no 90-pound women beating up a hallway full of men. So the women didn't dominate men physically. To the contrary, the film was intelligent and well-crafted. So unless you were told to anticipate it ahead of time or had an eye for that sort of thing, you wouldn't notice you're being preached to, as it's easy to get caught up in the entertainment of the moment, even though it hates and demonizes men. And speaking of the men of the film, they weren't stupid. But more importantly, you don't see them getting told. There are no lectures or finger-wagging or warnings to check their privilege. Now I can imagine some of you are wondering, how can I say this about a film like Widows, a film that dabbles in misandry? Well, that's because all movies, regardless of genre, have a bit of propaganda in them. It's just that the good ones focus on the plot, which is why I can appreciate Widows for its artistic prowess, in spite of the progressive messaging. And that used to be the case with all films coming out of Hollywood. The message was always subtle. They were metaphors buried within the narrative. But today, the narrative and overall entertainment value take a back seat to the message, as filmmakers today don't care if a movie is good, as long as the audience is lectured. And in a way, that's probably why I enjoyed the film so much. Again, that's patreon.com/Laymans Journal. And while you're there, please check out the rest of the videos in my Patreon library, as I'm sure there's something there you'll enjoy. And if you like this video, please share the link on your social media platforms. I cannot stress enough how far that goes into helping me grow the channel. And if you have a movie that you like to see broken down, please feel free to let me know. And that's it. That's all I have to say about it. What do you have to say about it? Leave a comment in the comment section and let's have a conversation.
How am I spending my Friday? Some jerk chicken with rice seasoned, red beans and some bread. Got some red wine over here. And I'm watching Layman's Journal on YouTube. Shout out to the brother Layman. Check him out. I'll leave the link in the description. It's your boy Calvin King. And this is how I'm enjoying my Friday.